Hey, it's Kaero. Welcome back to the channel. Fall rotation is just around the corner in September 2022 with the release of Dominaria United. Rotation is always an exciting time, but it's a volatile time for standard players as so many key cards are rotating out, leaving players wondering what decks will emerge as the new frontrunners in the format. Today I'm going over some of the key players in the current format that will be rotating out and what it's going to mean for the new post-rotation standard. If you enjoy this video or you get something out of it, I appreciate you hitting the like button and subscribing. And if you have a different opinion about rotation, please be sure to let me know in the comments. So let's get started. Here are the best cards that will be rotating out of standard in September 2022. Number 1, Goldspan Dragon. Goldspan Dragon has long been one of the best 5-drops in the format. With its release in Kaldheim, it basically created an entirely new archetype in the form of Izzet Dragons, which later evolved into Izzet Turns. This card is simply one of the best cards we've seen in a long time in Standard, and its ability to come down on turn 5, instantly attack for 4 damage, and protect itself by generating treasure that can be used to cast Negate or combat opposing removal spells is devastating to the opponent. Unless we get a similar replacement in Dominaria United, I am predicting that Izzet will not be anywhere near its current power level in the new standard. Number 2, speaking of Izzet, the loss of Expressive Iteration also threatens to hamstring that deck entirely. When Expressive Iteration was released in Strixhaven's School of Mages, it took a little while to catch on, but once it did, it made an impressive impact on Standard as well as other formats. The ability to cast this card early, put a card into hand, and exile a land to play on that same turn, keeping one of the lands that you already had in your hand, is incredible early game card advantage. Izzet and even Grixis and Temur are surely feeling the loss of Expressive Iteration come fall rotation. Number 3, lands. Not as exciting as the other cards in the video, but they are perhaps the biggest loss of all. Pathways from Zendikar, Rising, and Kaldheim. It's hard to understate the effects these cards have had on Standard since their release. Having efficient, untapped lands as versatile as these have made scores of 3 to 4 color decks actually viable, where they wouldn't have been, and have smoothed out curves in 2-colored decks of all forms. If we don't see a replacement in Dominaria United, expect decks with 3+ colors to be harder to run, maybe even prohibitively so, with the exception of slower, pure control builds, even with the Triomes from Streets of New Capenna and the duels from recent Innistrad sets. This one's kind of number 3.5. Their lands too. Control decks, mid-range decks, they're going to feel the loss of the creature lands from the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Most notably, Hall of Storm Giants, which can act as a win condition by itself in certain blue-based control decks. And Hive of the Eye Tyrant is a potent, sticky threat in black-based control and mid-range builds. And Cave of the Frost Dragon is pretty good too. It's no Faceless Haven, but since that got banned, Cave of the Frost Dragon has had to fill in that gap, and it's done pretty well. If we don't see any lands like these introduced in Dominaria United, this is going to shift the meta significantly. Number 4, we have Luminarc Aspirant. Just mentioning that name harkens back to games played against mono-white aggro all the time. Arguably, this is one of the best aggro cards released in Zendikar Rising, if not the best. Luminarc Aspirant has made its power known in a variety of low-to-the-ground aggro decks since its release. Whether it's the ever-popular mono-white aggro, it's Naya Humans, or now the popular Boros Burn or Orzhov Angels, Luminarc Aspirant has basically been an auto-include in any white-based competitive aggro deck since its release. And its loss will be felt in aggro decks, and it's hard to find a replacement for this. Basically, across the board in all white decks. And finally, we have Runes. Runes decks were basically unplayable until the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. They were slow to getting value on board. They were subject to getting easily 2-for-1 or sometimes 3-for-1 when your opponent used a Skyclave Apparition or a Brutal Cathar to instantly undo all the runes stacking, or simply just destroyed it or bounced it for 1 mana with Fading Hope for 1 or 2 mana. With Kamigawa Neon Dynasty's release, specifically the release of Jukai Naturalist, the ability to chain free runes made this deck one to be reckoned with. And it's still strong in the best of one standard format. But without the runes, the enchantment based aggro decks are going to cease to exist, and the more mid rangey Selesnya enchantments, featuring Hallowed Haunting, is likely to take its place, and I think will probably remain competitive. Honorable mentions here would be Lolth Spider Queen, a staple in most black based control decks, Vanishing Verse, the undeniable king of single target removal if you're running Orzhov, and Esika's Chariot. Honestly, Esika's Chariot could have made this list, but it's already, I think, seeing a little bit less play as time goes on, except for it's a pretty big staple still in Jund midrange and mono green. If you disagree with me, leave a comment below. I would be happy to respond and talk to you about it. I love comments. That's awesome. I'll respond. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. It really supports the channel. It helps me to bring you new content as often as possible. And to returning subscribers, thank you very, very much for your continued support, and I hope you have a great day.